On a June afternoon in 1969, a 6-year-old boy ran behind a bush to scare his family. He was 30 feet away. He was wearing a red and white striped shirt. He was smiling. He never came back out. What followed was one of the largest search operations in national park history. 1,400 people. Green Berets, Bloodhounds, helicopters. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a thread, not a single trace. The Martin family had made this trip before. William Martin loved the outdoors. He believed in the mountains the way some people believe in church. He was not a careless man. He was not a reckless man. He planned. He prepared. He took seriously the responsibility of bringing his children into the backcountry. On June 14, 1969, William set out with his father, also named William, his older son Doug, who was 10, his younger son Dennis, who was 6, and several relatives who brought their own children. It was a multi-generational outing, the kind that creates memories meant to last a lifetime. Their destination was Spence Field, a high open meadow at roughly 4,900 feet along the Appalachian Trail near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. They hiked in along the Anthony Creek Trail, about 4 miles of real elevation gain. For a 6-year-old, it was a serious hike. But Dennis was the kind of child who ran when others walked. He was energetic, enthusiastic. By all accounts, he was in good spirits the entire way up. They arrived in the early afternoon. The weather was warm, the sky was clear, the meadow stretched out before them. The adults settled in. The children began to play. It was a perfect afternoon. The kind that should have ended with tired legs and sunburned faces and stories told around a campfire. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, the children decided to play a prank on the adults. Dennis, Doug, their cousins. They would sneak off, hide behind the bushes, and jump out to surprise the grown-ups. The kind of spontaneous mischief that defines childhood. A game, a joke. The kind of thing that should have produced laughter. The children split up. Doug and the cousins went one direction. Dennis went another. He ran behind a clump of rhododendron bushes, dense, tangled. The kind of undergrowth that lines the trails of the Smokies like a living wall. He was going to hide. He was going to jump out and surprise everyone. He was 6 years old. He was perhaps 30 feet from his family. He was gone. When Doug and the cousins came out laughing, ready for the reveal, Dennis did not appear. The adults waited. They called his name. They walked to the bushes where he had disappeared. Nothing. William Martin began searching immediately. Not in a panicked way at first. With the focused urgency of a father who knows his child, who knows the terrain, who is certain Dennis must be just over the next rise. He called. He searched. He enlisted the other adults. Minutes passed. The sun began its descent toward the ridgeline. Dennis did not answer. Dennis did not appear. By 5 o'clock, William Martin knew something was terribly wrong. He began the long hike out to find help, a hike that would take precious time. Time that could not be recovered, time that the mountains were already using to swallow whatever trail Dennis Martin had left behind. The last confirmed sighting of Dennis Martin was at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon on June 14, 1969. He was wearing a red and white striped shirt. He was running. He was smiling. And then the rhododendron closed behind him, and he was gone. The first rangers arrived at Spence Field after 7 in the evening. More than 2 hours since Dennis vanished. The mountains were already cooling, shadows deepening in the hollows and ravines below the field. What followed was one of the most extraordinary search efforts in National Park Service history. Over 1,400 people at peak. Park rangers, FBI agents, civilian volunteers who drove hundreds of miles because a child was missing, and that was reason enough. And the United States Army Green Berets from Fort Bragg. Men trained for operations in exactly this kind of terrain. Dense forest, difficult terrain, the need to move quietly and efficiently through wilderness that would defeat ordinary soldiers. They were brought in because the standard search resources were not enough, because the mountains were winning. They worked in small teams, pushing into areas civilian searchers could not safely access. They rappelled into ravines. They cut through rhododendron thickets. They searched with the thoroughness of men who understood a child's life depended on their next step. They found nothing. Bloodhounds were brought in almost immediately. Animals bred and trained for exactly this work. They picked up Dennis's scent near the rhododendron bushes where he had last been seen. They moved with purpose. And then they stopped. The scent simply ended. Not faded, not confused by competing trails. Ended. Multiple dog teams were brought in over the following days. Every time, the same result. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the search area. But the Smokies' canopy is so thick that a person standing on the ground is invisible from above. The mountains do not give up their secrets easily, not even to those looking down from the sky. A storm rolled in shortly after the disappearance. The temperature dropped. Rain fell on terrain that was already treacherous. For a 6-year-old in a cotton shirt, exposure would have been measured in hours, not days. The weather was not helping. The mountains were not cooperating. And time was running out. The search covered thousands of acres. Every hollow, every creek bed, every ridgeline within reasonable distance of Spencefield. Teams pushed into areas that had likely never seen a human footprint. The command post at the trailhead became a small city. After 2 weeks, the largest ground search in the park's history had produced a single result: nothing. In the days following the disappearance, a piece of information emerged that added a deeply unsettling dimension to the case. A family hiking near Spencefield on the afternoon of June 14th reported seeing a man on the trail. Their description was striking. He was wild-looking, disheveled. His appearance seemed out of place even in a backcountry setting. And he was carrying something over his shoulder, something that appeared to be a large, dark bundle. Something heavy enough to require effort. Given the timing and the location and the fact that a 6-year-old boy had just vanished from that same stretch of mountain, investigators asked a question that has never been answered. Was it Dennis? The sighting was taken seriously. It redirected search resources. But the man was never identified, never found, never questioned. He disappeared as completely as Dennis Martin himself. If the sighting was accurate, then Dennis Martin's disappearance was not an accident. It was not a child wandering off in terrain too rugged for a small boy. It was something deliberate, something that speaks not of the indifference of nature, but of the cruelty of a human being. But witness accounts are imperfect. Memory is fallible. Distance distorts. That question has never been resolved. The most straightforward theory is that Dennis became lost and died of exposure. The Smokies can conceal remains for decades, but this theory struggles against the bloodhound evidence. Scent trails do not simply end. If Dennis had run into the woods, the dogs would have followed. A second theory centers on an animal attack. Bears were active in the park that summer, but animals leave evidence: drag marks, clothing fragments. This case has none. William Martin lived with the grief of a missing child for the rest of his life. It is not the grief of loss exactly, because loss implies a known ending. The grief of a missing child is open-ended. It is a wound that cannot close, because the question at its center never goes away. In the years that followed, William Martin did not stop searching. He could not stop. He returned to the Smokies again and again, hiking the trails around Spencefield, talking to rangers, following up on tips, pushing authorities to keep the case active. He wanted his son remembered as a person, as a child, as a 6-year-old who had been alive and laughing on a June afternoon, and who deserved to have someone still looking for him. William Martin went to his grave without knowing what happened to his son, a father who dedicated years of his life to finding answers, who had every motivation and every resource of love and determination, and who still could not penetrate the secret the Smokies have kept since that afternoon in 1969. Some questions, it seems, the mountains will not answer. The case of Dennis Martin remains officially open. The National Park Service and the FBI have never closed it. No remains have ever been recovered. No physical evidence of any kind has ever been found. After 56 years, the Great Smoky Mountains have not surrendered their answer. Dennis Lloyd Martin would be 62 years old today. Somewhere in those mountains, there is an answer. The question is whether anyone will ever find it. If you have information about this case, contact the National Park Service or the FBI. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We cover cases like this every week. Drop a comment and tell us what case you want us to look at next.